everybody! Last time I was talking about a possible update to Minecraft. This time I was talking about a hunter and gatherers update. This time I'm talking about the gatherer side of things. Last time I was talking about the hunter side of things. But now we're on to gathering. I imagine that in this update, there will be wild versions of plants scattered throughout the lands that you can now collect. These are wild carrots, wild potatoes, wild beetroots, and wild wheat. Of course, there could also be wild pumpkins and wild watermelons. These wild plants, when planted into the ground, become their domesticated counterpart. But it takes a few tries in order to successfully get that domesticated version. There is a plane. I don't know if you guys can see it. Plane. Anyway, these wild counterparts to the more domesticated versions of the plants are not as good as the domesticated versions. Just ignore those guys, they're neighbors. The birds aren't being obnoxiously loud today, which is nice. Then again, this sky is all cloudy, so there's that, I guess. Anyway, these wild plants can be domesticated, but after a few tries of planting them yourself, growing them, uprooting them. That was a bug. And then planting them again once you decided it would be a good idea. Once they are domesticated, they will be at their very best. I imagine that with the berries that are currently in the game, those would be the wild counterpart to the domesticated version, which would get you more berries than the wild version would. However, the domesticated version would have to be on tilled soil or farmland, which I guess would make sense, while the wild stuff doesn't have to be in farmed land, which also makes sense. If something is not domesticated and it is labeled as a wild item, it will not get you as good of items. But here's another part of this secondary piece. Gatherer. You can, I imagine you can make baskets. The grass will no longer get you seeds for your wheat. In order to get wheat, you must collect wild wheat, or the domesticated stuff that you'll find in villages. And not every village will be a domesticated-esque village. Some of them will have their wild counterparts instead, and will have completely different builds compared to the rest of the houses that you'll normally find, the rest of the villages that you'll normally find throughout the game. Anyway, these baskets can be made out of both the leather I was talking about previous video or grass. In order to get grass clear, you have to get shears and shear grass. And that can get you a very durable basket, which can hold plenty of space. I imagine it will have like the same amount of space that a shulker box would have, but it's only available to plants or plant-esque things. You can only put your wheat, your berries, your wood, and other things that are similar to those into this basket. Same thing goes if this basket is made out of leather, and if it's made out of leather, it will most likely be able to hold a little more, or maybe it can last longer. I would imagine that these baskets would eventually fall apart, which would make all the things inside of them fall all over the ground. However, I doubt this will happen very quickly, as it takes a while for this to happen. Anyway, earlier in the video, I was also talking about the non-domesticated-esque villages that I imagine would be part of this update. These guys would essentially be nomads similar to the wandering traders, except these guys would actually move the entire village with them, not just 2 or 3 llamas. They would instead have full-on tents and things made out of leather blocks, which I imagine can be a thing you can make with this update, with a similar build to how you can make like the crafting table, except it would be 4 leather instead of 4 wood and planks. Anyway, these houses and these nomads will actually be able to fight back, as they have no iron golems themselves. I imagine that may become a problem for them, especially during raids. However, they won't be raided as often as normal villages, as they can actually move around. Not only that, they can fight back with things like spears. These spears will be essentially a buildable version of the trident that the drowned can use. It's not as durable as the trident and requires multiple collections, but it's a fairly simple build. I imagine that it would be built with 2 sticks and stone or cobblestone, possibly even using Sharpened Bone, which is something I had mentioned in the previous video. Sharpened Bone is something that you should be able to make in this update. Sharpened Bone is putting a bone and flint into a crafting table, and you get your flint back and now sharpened 2 pieces of sharpened bone. This sharpened bone can now be used to make only fighting tools. Swords, knives, the very basic things that can be made with bone. But they could also make better arrows. Sharpened bone could be used instead of a normal point on bows, on the arrows that you use for bows. They may do like 2 or 3 more hearts of damage than the typical bow. And you would almost always now get bone whenever you kill an animal of sorts. Depending on the actual animal itself depends on how many bones you'll get, because it really depends on the size of the animal. And sometimes you may not get bones at all, and you'll instead get things like antlers and stuff. Anyway, Sharpened Bone will be a very useful tool, or a very basic thing to start your game with. It is essentially a really useful item for combat, and can, I imagine, would be able to be thrown like darts at enemies if they were not put into a bow. Not bow, an arrow. Like I said earlier, I imagine that these particular types of arrows would do more damage than the typical arrow. because they're made out of sharpened bone. And, that. Anyway, like I was saying earlier, these nomad villagers, their main thing is they would be able to fight and farm, as well as make the very basic tools. These guys would not trade for emeralds, but possibly for things like iron and the upcoming copper. I don't know if it's upcoming anymore or if it's actually in the game yet, because I'm not really all that into the computer version of the game. I only know the things that I've watched online, and that even that is very limited. Anyway, they would probably ask for things like iron, sharpened bone, and other things that more basic societies would most likely desire. They may even give you some basic leather things, as now leather is fairly complex and a little bit more annoying to make. It may be possible that these nomadic villagers will be the only ones that will actually trade and accept leather of any kind. Meanwhile, the villages that are at only a single spot, they will not accept your leather or your pelts, because they have no need for such things. Maybe silk will become part of the game too, I don't know. It's an idea, but the idea of silk is a bit more confusing. Anyway, like I was saying, these nomadic villagers would be able to fight back if there were ever a raid. Whenever raids happen for these nomadic villagers, instead of iron golems going after everyone, these nomadic villagers don't have golems, and they will instead fight, most likely using horses and their spears and things. I also imagine that spears can be used while on an animal, while swords cannot. It'd be really interesting if there were an item in the game similar to the trident, except you can use it while on a horse. I said earlier about how this would be made. I said it would be using 2 sticks and then sharpened bone / flint, or some other sharp thing in the game. But wait, where was I going with that? I don't know where I was going with that. Oh, right. How the actual sticks would be placed. If the sticks are placed on top of each other, instead of getting a spear and putting that together, you would most likely instead get a shovel. But if they're diagonal instead, any kind of diagonal, they would instead get you what you actually want, aka the spear. I also imagine that spears can stack up to maybe 16, similar to chicken eggs, but that may be a little more complex than I'm willing to go with this. Anyway, these nomadic villagers will not just fight back against villagers, but will also fight back against the player if the player ever decides to attack the village. Sure, this village is very nomadic and very basic, but they know a threat when they see one. Another thing is that whenever they're moving around, taking down their tents and going to a different location, if they come across another village, there may be a chance that they will stay at the village for longer than they typically will in order to make trades done. Or there's a chance that this nomadic village, instead of being pacifistic, they will go into that village and kill every villager there, with the possibility of getting themselves destroyed by the iron golems. Or maybe some of these nomadic villagers will decide to align themselves in the same position as villagers, seeing themselves as essentially equals. It may be totally possible that villagers and these nomadic villagers may become essentially equals depending on the aggressiveness of that particular village. Imagine that there would be a scale of 1, 2, and 3 for these villages. 1 means they're passive. They won't attack you for the most part. They also will not attack other villages, and they will not associate themselves with villagers. 2, they will be more neutral. The entire group may turn on you if you decide to attack them. Smaller villages without an iron golem may be attacked, and they will most likely fight against villagers and still not associate themselves with them. Ooh, excuse me. And 3 is aggressive. These villages will flat out will not trade with you and will instead try to take all your crap. There's a good chance that they will align themselves with villagers, and they will attack all villages that they come up across. But there's a good chance that this whole idea may just be scrapped for the 1, 2, 3 in terms of the nomadic villagers, and maybe these nomadic villagers are just all neutrals, and I guess that would make sense. Also, these nomadic villagers would most likely have wolves and cats. More likely wolves than they would cats, since cats are a thing in the game now. Wolves would be alongside hunters in these nomadic villages, and the wolves would most likely then go out of their way to attack villagers that attack their town, or if they decide to attack the player or another village, help in destroying whatever they need to be helping with. These nomadic villages may also have horsemen that will instead ride on horses all the time. These guys will most likely not have any trades, and will most likely be the main way of defense if an villager attack ever happens. Anyway, I'm kind of getting low on ideas for this side of things, so I hope you guys liked this idea for Minecraft for like an update, and go ahead in the comments below, tell me what you think about the idea of an update like this. Anyway, see you in the next video, and oh, right, don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't forget my videos. Or, you know, you don't have to. It literally does not matter at all. Not like I get monetization at all. But, whatever. Anyway, bye, I guess.